Howdy YouTube, Sybil Grace here. In today's video, we are going to be talking about basic practice routine, some more chords and how to use them. We are going to be talking about how to learn songs and how to apply the methods we've been learning up till now. We're going to be going over a few more scales as well. So a lot of really important fundamental information. If you're watching this on YouTube and you've been enjoying the lessons so far, please subscribe to the channel. I'm making these available to students because I want to really help people learn my teaching style and learn these fundamentals, but also I am a guitar teacher. If you are interested in potentially taking lessons with me, you can reach out via my website, sybilgrace.com. Also, feel free to ask questions below or engage in any way that feels right to you. Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm learning I have to do the double check because if I don't, last week's video took me 7 hours to edit because the audio didn't get recorded properly and I had to splice together audio from multiple files. I learned my lesson. Not only do I need to have multiple things recording, but I also need to remember to double check all of them. Today, this is really where the rubber hits the road, as it were. We're going to be off to the races. It's going to be a lot of fun because we've already gone over a lot of fundamentals, and I had a debate in my head about, do we want to do songs this week or do we want to do it next week, right? And it was last week, Tamar had asked me about songs. I went on a big, long rant about how be patient. And I do want to just clarify again, just so everyone gets to the point here. Songs are an amazing way to learn things that you can only learn through playing songs. So there are times when playing songs is like the absolute best way to really learn and understand, because what a real understanding in music is that our brain does a meta-analysis of all the music we've ever listened to and all the music we've ever played and analyzed, and all of that comes together, and that actually tells us how music works. It's not learning a bunch of rules, though there are rules and definitions. I should say more definitions than rules, though there are some rules if you're trying to fit into certain styles and so on. But what I'm trying to say is that we want to learn songs, and we want to learn from songs, and we want to know where that fits into the overall learning process. That way, we can make optimal progress. There are certain things that you'll pretty much mostly learn through songs, and if you're waiting to learn them through exercises, you might not understand really important concepts that exist within, I'm going to say, the sub-universe of guitar playing and how it works in the style of music you play and so on. Point is, songs are good, but when it comes to learning guitar fundamentals, they will often leave you a little bit stuck or frustrated. And I'm going to tell you real quick what happened to me when I was learning and I didn't really have the fundamentals. I would start trying to learn a lot of songs, but I would pretty much give up after a half hour, or maybe a couple sessions or whatever. But I would just reach a point where I just didn't understand how to move forward with the song, or I would try to play and I would be pushing myself to play it, and I'd play it really sloppily, and I wouldn't know how to close the gap between how do I play a better version of this song. And so that's where we really just want to understand that when it comes to learning songs, go slow with it, play at the level that's appropriate for you. So we're going to get into learning songs today, but we're going to talk about it on a really simple level, because we're not going to try to play the songs the way that they're played on record right away. And in fact, a lot of times you even can't play them the way they are on record. And this is something that trips up a lot of players, actually, even intermediate and advanced players sometimes. But there isn't always an objectively correct way you're supposed to play a given song. And most of the time, it's best to play your own version of the song, that you're expressing it the way that you want to play it. If you're trying to be in a tribute band where everything needs to be exactly identical, then you can specialize in that and you can get good at that. And there are times when digging into the details and learning to play exactly what they're doing, sometimes that's a great way to level up and learn licks and things like that. But most of the time, I think it's the most fun to just get the gist of the song and just play your own version of it and not worry about having it be exactly the way it's done on a record. Because again, on a record, they often will layer 5 or 6 different guitars. And so you're like, which is the guitar part you're supposed to play here, right? Or maybe it's a song that you like. Maybe it's a pop song. Maybe there's not even any guitar on the song, right? And you just want to be able to play your own guitar version of it. It's a very common situation. And what we're trying to do is learn to get the gist of the song and play some version of it. And then from there, we play at whatever level of detail we understand, and we add to that level of detail over time. And from time to time, spend time to really try to learn things that are maybe very specific, but also give yourself permission to just play your own version of the song and just don't worry about getting it exactly right. And if you actually apply that, it'll make things a lot easier on yourself. And that's what we're going to work on today, as well as I had made this promise about how if you learned just a couple chords, you could play lots and lots of songs. So I want to actually make good on that promise and show you how to get there. So that's going to be part of today as well. Let me plug my guitar in. Now we're ready to go. Okay, so we had worked, going back, on these 4 chords here. And I called them the 4 magic chords. And I said that if you learn these chords, you can play hundreds of thousands of songs. This is true. But you probably will be able to play things that are your own version of the songs and not exactly the way they are on the record. That's the catch, right? Because when you hear a song on a record, there might be a lot of embellishments or things that are done with the chord. They might add in some extensions. There's a lot of variations on these chords that you could play. And there's different licks and things that people will throw into songs, and that's, it's just the way it works. But to play some version of the song and to get the gist of the song, these will do just fine. And I'm going to introduce another set of chords today as well, that if you include those, you're going to really be able to increase what you can do with this. And let me show you how this works. So these are the chords: C major, which we call the 1 chord in the key of C, F major, the 4 chord, G major, the 5 chord, and A minor, the 6 minor chord. Okay, for theoretical reasons, these chords are extremely significant in the key, and it's hard to tell much of a story without using them. And we probably won't get that into tonal theory in this course, but in any given key, the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord, and the 6 chord are always, it's always the case that the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord are major chords, and the 6 chord is always a minor chord. And whenever key we're in, they always have the same relationships. And I showed with the capo how we can move up and down the neck and change our key. So if I play, let's just say the folk progression, I'm going to play a 1, 4, 1, 5, which is going to be C, F, C, G. You hear how this sounds like a car insurance commercial or something, So that's a 1, 4, 1, 5 progression in the key of C. If I play it in the key of D, D's a whole step up. We talked about the circle of notes. So D's a whole step up from C, and each fret is a half step. So I go up 1, 2 frets. So now the key of C becomes the key of D. So that's the same chord shapes there. And when I play the C shape, the F shape, and the G shape, but I have the capo on 2, now I'm in the key of D, and those relationships of the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord hold true. So whatever key the song is in is probably going to use these chords in the same general relationships, because these are functionally very important chords. To tell a good musical story, to have a story that goes anywhere, we need to go somewhere, And these are the most logical places to go for most cases. So because of that, most songs are primarily made from these 4 chords. Okay, there are a lot of exceptions as well, and there are a lot of songs that go all over the place. But if we're just talking about like standard strummer pop songs and so on, they're not usually going too far out of that because you can tell a huge emotional range with just these anyway, and then sometimes there will be variations on them. But we're going to get into that. Remember when we change the position on the neck and we move to a new place, we can call this transposition. So when we take a key, we take a piece and we move it to a new key, we call that transposition. And here, does everybody here know the website ultimateguitar.com? Okay, not everybody. I did include to talk about it. So there are plenty of places to find tab and things on the internet and guitar chords and such. But I wanted to show this today because there's a really neat feature in it that allows you to play some version of whatever song you want, or at least of a lot of songs. So here, I'm going to search for Blowin' in the Wind by Bob Dylan. Now, this was originally, I think it was in the key of E. And if you look down here at the bottom of the page, you can see these transpose buttons, okay? If I wanted to play this song and I were you and I hadn't been taught some of these chords yet, I'd be like, oh, I really want to play Blown in the Wind, but I don't know what to do. If you go here to transpose and you go down, you'll see that now these are all chords we recognize, okay? So you can play a version of Blown in the Wind in whatever, in this case in the key of C, using those chord shapes, and again, in the style of, for copyright reasons, so there I'm just playing along, and I'm just using those chord shapes I've already learned. And if I wanted to play it in the original key, I could just use the capo and go, okay, now I'm going to put it, so E is 2 whole steps above C, so that means I'm going to put the capo on fret 4. And now I can play the C, F, G, and C, and be in, I don't even know if this was the original key or not, but using those same chord shapes to play it in the hypothetical original key of a song that were in the style of Blowin' in the Wind by Bob Dylan. So this is extremely handy because whatever song you're interested in, as long as it's semi-popular, there's probably going to be at least a page of chords on Ultimate Guitar, and you can use these transpose buttons. I tried it out even when I wasn't logged in, and it still seemed to work just fine. And so we could try this with another song. So let's just do Brown Eyed Girl, because that's like the default guitar teacher song. Now, here we can see that we have a G and a C. We know those chords, but we haven't worked on the D. Not yet. I'm actually going to introduce it in this lesson as well. But if we want, we can see that's not the right chord. So we can play around with transposing until we see the chords we recognize. Okay. C, F, C, G. Hey, those are all chords I recognize. And wait, here's the 6 minor. Okay. All right, so that one's in there. And we could play along with that. And typically, you know, you could either use the capo to get it into the key of the song, or just not even worry about what key you're playing it in, and just follow along and play your own version. By the way, you'll notice the folk progression, right? This is just literally the same progression. It's the Brown Eyed Girl progression. But it's not just that. It's thousands and thousands of songs are just that progression. Last week I told you when you learn these progressions, you're learning songs. You just don't know which songs they are yet necessarily. And I hold to that, actually. And I would encourage you to go on Ultimate Guitar and use this transposition buttons, and you just have to click until the chords are just the ones you recognize. Sometimes some of them will be ones you recognize, sometimes some of them won't be. And then some songs will have chords that are from outside the key. Sometimes we call them borrowed chords. Some songs will have modulation where they go to a new key within the song. So this won't work for every single song. This will just work well for songs that don't change key, but that's still thousands and thousands of songs. So for now, when you're playing this, you're going to be thinking, okay, how do I know exactly when to change chords? You can see they're written along with the lyrics here, so you can just use your ear and try to follow along for now. When you're practicing it on your own, I would just start by, since you probably want to practice the chords anyway, you can just make sure that you practice them in the way they're written on the page so that you know that you're getting the chord changes that you would need to play the song. And then a couple weeks from now, you'll have a much better understanding about strumming and rhythm, and then you can start dialing in getting the timing right. But for now, just focus on the changes and don't worry about the timing as much. So like I said, we were going to get into songs. Promise kept. Okay. And for now, there are songs that are like just melody as well. So not all songs on guitar are just strumming chord. You can play melodic songs. The theme from Stardew Valley video game. But the purely melodic songs do exist as well. Some guitar teachers will start with teaching those, and you'll be playing things like Twinkle Little Star and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and so on. I don't think that most of you are going to want to end up playing that stuff, and you'll actually get more benefit, at least in a lot of ways, from focusing on scales. So I want to make sure that when it comes to melody, feel free to learn melodic songs. We're going to get into guitar tab and some melodic songs next week, but when it comes to learning how to pick one note at a time, just play your scales. You should be doing as much scales as you can convince yourself to. So today, what we're getting into beyond just looking at songs is we're going to look at this basic practice routine. I included this in the PDF. And I want to talk through, because there are 3 phases, and in my opinion, these 3 phases are great. They can expand and contract depending on how much you like to practice. I still structure my practice in a 3-phase structure like this. It was taught to me by a number of instructors, and I think it works really well. So I would say it's good to adhere to if you can. The other thing, though, is it is, like I said last week, important to focus on streaks of days. So when it comes to like having an ideal or optimized routine, give yourself permission to practice even if you don't have time to do the whole routine. Because sometimes you can be like, I don't have 45 minutes and therefore I can't practice or something. No, just if you've got 5 minutes, pick up a guitar, do something with it. That's, again, it's not optimal, but it still helps you get closer to your goal, and it keeps your head in the game. Because the big issue for beginners is they put the guitar down and they don't realize, oh, it's been 3 weeks. Oh, gosh. Just every day, if you're doing a little bit with it, you're way more likely to succeed. Okay, so 3 phases. The first phase is the warm-up phase. That's then followed by the technical development phase, which is then followed by the creative application phase. All right. In the warm-up phase, we do our warm-up exercises. The main point of the warm-up phase is that it is an all systems go checklist where you can make sure that you're ready to play you get your fingers warmed up, you get your picking dialed in, and this is a good time to practice. If you have a few chords that you're trying to upkeep, you can do chord push-ups on them. Just make sure you're like, okay, I know those, but I want to make sure my hands know them and they're ready to play them. And then you can do things like practicing finger names, fret numbers. Eventually, this will not necessarily need to be in there. And I put ear training exercises in here as well. This is, in a sense, more technical development oriented, but there are times when warming up with ear training is ideal, and we probably won't really get into ear training in this program, but if ear training is actually quite important for helping develop your musicality, and there's plenty of information online about it. Like, you can just search on YouTube for ear training, and you can see lots of people talking about methods and stuff. It is a snake oil industry a little bit when it comes to ear training. A lot of the people selling courses and stuff make big promises, but what I will say is that for me personally, and for thousands and thousands of other musicians, ear training has unlocked musical abilities that you would think you don't even have. Again, worth it, but we're not going to derail our course that much to talk about it much more. Your warm-up phase should be 5 to 10 minutes. If you're practicing a lot, like say that you're practicing an hour or more, you might do a 15-minute warm-up phase. Or if you've been out in the cold and your hands are cold or something like that, you might warm up for 15 minutes. But you can breeze through this. You can mix and match. You don't have to do everything every time. You have a lot of autonomy on how you approach this. And again, some things only take a minute, like callus building. That might take 30 seconds, right? You don't have to really spend a lot of time on it. And then when you get into technical development, this is where we look at applying and diving into technical exercises and things that really take brain work, right? This is where you're challenging yourself to learn to play better. So I like to split this up into scales and chords, and rhythm exercises should be part of it, but they can be part of your chords practice, and they can be part of your scales practice, or they can be their own standalone thing. There's a lot of diverse ways that are optimal to practice as you improve over time. But basically, for now, the stuff that we've covered are going to be things like note finding practice and playing your scales. So I should have written in here as well, just ascending and descending and scales, sequenced scales. That's something you can look up. We probably won't get into sequencing too much, but just for anybody who's more advanced or wants to get more advanced, scale sequencing will become really important, and that's something you can look up. But it's not important for a beginner to know about that. So we will not. I'm going to unbold it. Anyway. But yeah, we did talk about ascending and descending scales. So in your scales block, work on your note finding and work on going up and down scales for now. And these two things we haven't really talked about, but they're just in here for, so that to like Google search those as you're getting more advanced, because they do matter in the long term. And then chords, we've gone over chord push-ups, and I say new development. So upkeep happens when you play songs too, right? So the chords that you use, you'll use them when you play songs, so you don't always have to practice them separately. But new development means new chords you haven't worked on. The concept of upkeep versus new development is quite important in learning guitar. The things that we're upkeeping, the chords we already know, the scales we already know, the songs we already know, those things take less effort and less time, but they still need to be upkept. And then new development, learning new scales, new chords, new songs, that type of stuff is going to take the bulk of the work. So if you think about what is the most effort, learning something new, but you still want to make sure that you upkeep things. And I would say keep a list of any songs you've learned, because it's really easy to forget which songs you've worked on and then forget to play them. I have, in the online portal that I use with my students, we have a repertoire tracker. I think that's really handy because students can track not only which songs they've worked on, but how much effort they've put into them. And then at the bottom here is creative application. Repertoire. Repertoire is songs you play. And again, new development is learning new songs, and it's going to take more time And upkeep is going to be playing songs to keep them fresh. And you will make progress on upkeep as well. There's some value to it. But if we're really talking about optimal practice, will always be successful in the sense that you're playing to the best of your known ability. The things that you're practicing sound good. You have confidence with what you're doing. But you're still challenging yourself a bit. You want to find a way to keep things a bit challenging the entire time. And when it comes to things like songs, that's where, maybe you want to learn some new songs and go to a deeper level where you're getting more accurate with them. Or, maybe you want to try to play in a new key, or you want to try to learn some songs that have some new types of chords you haven't played or whatever. Just try to make sure that you're always just pushing at that boundary just a little bit. That's where you'll have success. Where you might be less likely to succeed is if you try jumping in to a bunch of songs and you're not following the same method each time, right? So the method that will work, at least as far as really easily right now, is go on Ultimate Guitar, find songs that look like they don't have that many chords in them, and then press the transpose button until you recognize all the chords. And then from there, try it out and try to get good at that until you've done that for 5 or 10 or 20 or 100 songs, however many you think is comfortable, and start trying to get a sense of what a song is. And then, oh yeah, they are all made from similar stuff. And then you start thinking about song structure, and the theory kind of emerges out of, again, that meta-analysis that your brain does as it naturally processes large numbers. Okay, so then creative application. This is where I said last week, do as much of it as you want. So try to do at least 10 to 20 minutes of technical development, but then go do as much creative application. So this includes things like improvising and jamming and songwriting, right? And we will get into improvising and jamming a little bit in this as well, in the primer course. Not today, but more in the future. And songwriting as well. For now, knowing that most songs are made from the same components, that means that those components are not copyrightable, which means that if you want to write a song, you can literally just use the chords we're already using and put them in whatever order you want. And now you're off to the races. You're writing your own song, and it's made from core structural components that will work and hold up over time, the same way that, Dust in the Wind or any other classic has stood the test of time. I'm a huge Kansas fan, so anytime I can bring up Dust in the Wind, I'm going to bring it up. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about this basic practice routine, does that make sense to everybody? Like I said, this can shrink and grow depending on how much time you have, but try to do at least 10 to 20 minutes of technical development. And there's a minimum amount of practice where if you're doing an exercise for too short of time, you're not as likely to have a breakthrough. You're much more likely to have a breakthrough after minute 10. If I'm playing scales or something and I want to get better at a scale, I need to do it for 5 or 6 minutes before I'm really able to make higher quality observations and really relax and really see some growth. In advanced training, it can be as much as 20 minutes where we'll just play the same scale or the same idea over and over for 20 minutes because we know we might be quite a lot better at it at minute 20 than we would be if we stopped at 5. We certainly are not into wasting time. We don't want to play the same scales over and over forever, at least not all the time. Sometimes I do, but anyway, that's just my own preference. Okay, now there are some more chords. They will open additional doors for you. We have 6 more chords I'm introducing today that are going to allow you to play and start branching out into other keys a little bit more, as well as fleshing out the remainder of the main chords in the key of C. And so a lot of songs that branch outside of the 4 primary chords, the 4 magic chords, a lot of those songs are going to be using these 2 chords here as another option. So you're very likely to see an E minor chord, and you're very likely to see a D minor chord as your next boss. And if you throw those 2 chords into your knowledge bank, then you're going to be able to play so many additional songs just from getting those 2 in. And they're quite easy to play, actually. E minor is just 2 fingers. And then D minor is fingers 2, 3, and 1. We're just strumming 4 strings on that and 6 strings on E minor. Now we can tell a really complicated musical story. So just adding in those 2 additional chords, there's all these other emotional roads you can go down, and they're all in the same key as each other, which means you can mostly use them in a lot of orders. They're going to sound really complementary to each other. And so when songwriters are looking to go a little bit deeper than the 4 primary chords offer, they'll add in these other 2 chords. And unfortunately, I didn't label these. I'll try to fix this by next week's PDF. But this E minor is the 3 minor chord in the key, and this D minor is the 2 minor chord in the key. So if we go back up here, we have some pizza slices in here, right? Yep, here we go. So this is the key of C. If we go to the top here, we have the 1 chord. And then counterclockwise, we've got the 4 chord and the 2 minor chord. The D minor is the 2 minor, and then the 1 and the 6 minor, and then the 5 and the 3 minor when we rotate clockwise from the center. So these are the chords in the pizza slice, and when we go to another key, it's the same relationship. So here's the 1, the 4, and the 5, and the 6, the 2, and the 3. 1, 4, 5, 6, 2, 3. So we could go all the way around a circle of fifths and figure out those chords. Basically, they'll give you a route to add more emotional nuance, and because of that, adding in those 2 chords there will really expand on how many songs you can play. And then these variations here, E major and D major, all of these here are the next chords I would really say that you should be learning after the ones that we had worked on already. So E major, D major, this one here is A major, and this is a variation on G major, okay? And this variation is really neat because, first off, it sounds nice. It's a nice stable version of the chord. We call that a voicing, by the way. You can play the same chord in multiple ways. In fact, there are lots of ways to play a G major chord. But this voicing here that we learned earlier is one voicing, and then this other one is another voicing. Now, this voicing here is really great if you're playing in the key of D. And Taylor Swift does this all the time. And I really admire Taylor Swift's guitar playing because she plays incredibly efficiently. She takes every shortcut. Like every shortcut. I love it. So it's when you go from the G to a D major chord, which is another one of the chords we're working on. The third finger stays on the same note, so you can use that as an anchor point and anchor your hand as you move between the chords. So if you watch, and so D is the 5 chord of the key of G. And remember, the 5 chord is one of the 4 magic chords. It's very important. So we're going to constantly, if we're in the key of G, go between a G chord and a D chord. And so you can leave that third finger in place, and this makes it super easy. And there's a simple version of the C chord, a C add 9, which also sounds modern country. And it's just a sparkly chord Taylor Swift uses. This version of the 4 chord in the key of G is a C. And so Taylor could play something like, this is the Brown Eyed Girl progression. So it's fun being able to keep that third finger anchored so that you can really easily play by feel, and then you can use the capo and move on. But the main chords that are really important, so these 4 down here, these are extra, because I know some people here have played before as well, but think of these as the stretch goal chords. But these 2 here, the E minor and the D minor, those are still in the initial key of C. And so we want to get really good at those if we can. So spend time on those chords. And then the last thing is scales level 3. So I'm introducing some new scales to play. And when I include these hollow square notes, these are notes that are in the key, but they're not notes that you necessarily need to play when you're practicing the scale. So they're there to show you that they're there, but they're not meant to be, you absolutely can play them, but traditionally, for instance, a scale goes between 2 root notes. So it sounds most conventional to play ascending from G2 to G4 and from G4 to G2. And then let me do this. So when I practice and improvise and so on, I might include this low F sharp or this high A. Because it is in key. But if I'm just playing the scale, I'll often start on the G and stop on the G. So that's what we call the G major scale. And then if we take 2 of the notes out, in this case it's an F sharp and a C, if we drop those notes from the scale, we get what's called the major pentatonic. So this is a really friendly scale. It's the friendliest scale. Pentatonic scales are actually quite beautiful, and you can do so much with it. So the fact that it's just 5 notes in multiple octaves, don't let that fool you. They're really lovely. And then there are 2 scales. So these are the minor pentatonic. A lot of times the minor pentatonic will be the first scale someone learns. This version of it has open strings that you could do. And this is really easy. You just use fingers 1 and 2. So you go... quite easy. That's the E minor pentatonic. and then the G minor pentatonic 1 4 1 3 1 3 1 3 1 4 1 4. So we are going to get into improvisation. We will talk about improvisation and jamming, and that's where scales really come into their own. For now, you can just treat these as technical exercises if you don't want to worry about improvising. But like I went over in the basic practice routine, you should always have some scales as part of your technical development. But it is fine to do them on alternating days. So you could have a chords focused day and a scales focused day the next day. That's okay. Or you could do chunks where you do 3 chord days in a row and 3 scale days in a row. As long as you try to actually balance them and keep them in balance, it's only going to be an issue if you ignore it like almost entirely. Okay? Does everyone think that they understood what we covered and understand how I'm recommending you practice it? Cool. And with the new chords, remember, you might do a lot of chord push-ups on them first. And then see if you can find some songs that use them, perhaps, using that transposition tool in Guitar Pro. And yeah, as long as you're searching for songs that are pretty popular, you'll probably find them out there, and just use that as a way of incentivizing yourself to practice the chords, because you're like, maybe I don't know the rhythms for these songs yet, so I can't really play them in time, but I at least know that if I learn these chords, I'll eventually be able to play this song. Where does the standard music notation fit into the guitar learning picture? That's one of those things that, like, it's not an oversight. It's just that guitar is like a very different instrument because, first off, if you're pursuing like playing classical guitar primarily, or some jazz guitarists will primarily read from, sheet music. But that is something that you should study as you do positional playing. On guitar, there are actually multiple places of finding almost every note. On a piano, there's only one place each note is. It's a triviality figuring out how to read sheet music for piano. It's still hard, but it's a lot easier. On guitar, there is no way for a beginner to know where to play the note. Okay? Because if you see C3 written down, there's C3 here, and there's C3 here. So every guitar piece must be arranged. And when we arrange it, that's where we choose, where am I going to play it? Do I want to play the C major scale here, or do I want to play it here? Those are literally the same notes. So if you saw that written down, or I could play it like this. There are actually, if you take a 2-octave C major scale, there are over 1.4 billion ways to play it on the guitar. Okay, and I've done the math on it. This stuff gets really nuts really fast. Sight reading doesn't work for guitar the way that it does traditionally on other instruments. And the other thing I said at the beginning of this lesson when I talk about songs is a lot of times we're not actually playing exactly what was done on a recording, the way that if you're playing, like, it's very important that you play exactly the notes written with exactly the right rhythms. And if you're playing in like a jazz ensemble or something like that, it's incredibly important. For guitar, your goal is to not be looking at a page and reading from it the way you would. That being said, there actually is totally a place for that, and it's something that every guitarist should learn how to do. Guitarists should learn how to read, but that's not the common way it's done, because, first off, most guitarists can't read sheet music. We will get into tab as well, okay? So tablature is far superior for a newer player, and when I can get an example of this pulled up real fast. So when we look at arrangements for the guitar, when I come up with exercises where I need to play something specific, these are my arrangements for my band. So here's the lines that I would play. There's a system called tablature. We're going to get into this next week. And it tells us where to play, and then up here tells us what notes to play. But even with this, we'll often just write the chord name above as well. And these are really in the vein of like a lead sheet where it's giving you the gist. But the point is, this combo stave here, where the notes are right now, if I put a chord in here, whoops. Okay, rude. So here's a G chord, and you can see that we have the tab for it, and we have the stave, and if we wanted, we could put a diagram above it as well. And mostly for guitar though, so songs, I hinted at this earlier, but a song, like a Bob Dylan song or something, you're not supposed to play it exactly the way Bob Dylan did it. You're supposed to understand what a song is and play it in your way that you like to play the song. And that's a perspective that a lot of musicians have. But the folk tradition, the way guitar is treated, it's not really sight-read as such. But if you are studying classical, you'll absolutely do a ton of sight reading. If you're studying jazz guitar, you'll do a lot of reading. And I think that every guitarist should learn to read for guitar. I teach my students how to read for the guitar. So I am pro reading, but it is not the norm, and it is not the way you'll get access to most of the songs you play. Most of the songs you play will just be like a couple of chords written down, and it's up to you to figure out how to play them in the right time, and so you learn the convention. And there are, again, if you're trying to learn to play it exactly the way it's recorded, then you'll find a tablature. That tablature is an experienced guitarist saying, here's the optimal way that I've found to play those particular notes, because there are oftentimes dozens and dozens of ways to play any given phrase if you're just reading the notes. And so that problem makes it so beginners should need to solve that. And if you're working with a classical teacher, we could have taken these 8 weeks to just go over positional playing and how to read the notes on the guitar. And we are going to get into that a little bit. I gave you the scale that has the notes on them, right, and so on. So I've pulled back the curtain there a little bit, but it is just not important for most guitarists in the first year to really spend much time worrying about reading notes. But that being said, yeah, just try to not stress about it. Try to get the gist of the song. Most of the time, that's all we're trying to do. And then sometimes we want to do like an accurate tribute. Or maybe you want to play a classical guitar piece where you want to do it exactly the way it should be performed, right? So it's, but yeah, and it's a complex answer because guitar pieces come from so many different sort of schools of thought, as it were. And when people have played instruments like piano or violin, these instruments have been taught and graded for hundreds of years, and the repertoire is well explored. And the goal, the outcome from that is well understood. Whereas with guitar, you'll have some students that are into rock, and some that are into blues, and some that are into folk, and some that are into... and that have totally different goals. Some people want to be songwriters, some people want to be performers, and so on. So you have a huge range of goals, a huge range of styles, and each of those styles has its own traditions, and some of them have more formal written score, but most of them, at least for guitar, you'll be lucky if you get a tab. Again, another reason why ear training is important. And then if you're a jazz performer or something, yeah, you'll be reading lots of pages. But that's the thing, is like when it comes to reading music, again, everyone should learn to do it. But it really takes only about 10 hours to get the basics. It's not that hard. 10 hours of effort, we'll say, to just understand what's going on with it. And then from there, you can just decide how big of a part of my life do I want that to be right now. If you're starting to do arrangements with other musicians and you're starting to take an existing melody and figuring out how you want to play it on the guitar and that type of thing, those are all more kind of advanced scenarios anyway. So if you ever want to know if you're ready to take on reading studies, first off, there are lots of method books on reading for guitar, but it's positional. I talked about this. So one of the keys to position is that in position, each note only exists in one place. So that makes reading possible because it removes that duplication issue. But again, most guitarists aren't reading. Most of them don't even know how to read music. And most of the time, we're just trying to say what key is it in. And from there, are we playing the 1 chord, the 4 chord, or the 5 chord, or the 1 chord, the 5 chord, and the 4 chord? And there's entire genres of music where folk and bluegrass and blues where the conventions are really adhered to, and you just got to know like what key you're in, and then everything else is up to the band to just come up with. And that's a beautiful thing about it. But hopefully that's not too ambiguous. But yeah, that's answering your question of where does the standard music notation fit into the guitar learning picture? It can do as soon as you want it to. Just look up a book on reading methods, and there's plenty of YouTube and stuff, and we will talk about it a little bit. But in the meantime, just don't worry about it too much unless you feel like you have a need to. And then plan on, if you're wanting to really understand the guitar, that's where starting to read really comes in handy. But in the meantime as well, just practicing your notes a lot. And then when you look at your scale, practice saying the notes of your scale and that type of thing. And that's good enough for beginners, is that they should be just mostly thinking about the notes in the circle of notes and where to find them on the guitar, and just practicing going up and down each string. And then guitarists tend to use shapes as like a shortcut because you can do so much with so little. Again, it's part of the crutches that the whole guitar industry is propped up on. But again, it's miraculous that we can do so much. Like I said, with the 4 chords that we already been working on, thousands of songs are just primarily based on those chords. And if you add in those 2 more chords, you've got thousands more songs opened up to you. And then with the capo, you can play it in any key you need with just a couple shapes, and you could make a whole career out of just the stuff we've covered in this class, or at least the foundation of a whole career. I know a lot of guitarists that aren't really going far beyond that. Anyway, okay, let's wrap up. But as always, thank y'all for coming. I'm really happy to see so many people here today, and nice to see you again, Connor and Kaylin? Yeah, I got it. Okay, hopefully. All right, and Tamar and Drew. All right, see y'all soon, hopefully. And next week we will be doing the same time and everything, but we will get into the reading of the tab more, and which is this again. This is the tablature notation. So we'll get into how to read this stuff, and yeah, the music staff and stuff next week. All right, thanks. If you've watched till now, thank you so much. I wanted to once again recommend, if you're getting a lot out of the content, subscribe. It really does help. Leave a comment. And if you're interested in taking lessons with me, you can reach out via my website, sybilgrace.com. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.